The first scream shattered the silence of the canyon like a rifle shot. It wasn't Maria's. It came from the wind, a shrill whistle tearing down the red cliffs as if the land itself was warning her. She stumbled in the dirt outside her cabin, breath burning her throat, and turned to face the figure stepping into the circle of firelight. His body glistened with sweat and dust, a towering shadow moving with the quiet grace of a predator. An Apache warrior. His long black hair spilled down his shoulders, tangled with feathers and beads that gleamed in the flames. His chest rose and fell as if he had been running for hours, muscles coiled tight beneath skin marked by scars that whispered of a dozen battles. His eyes dark, unflinching, searching, locked on her with a force that made her legs quake. In his hands he carried the burlap sack. The sack she had sworn would never be seen. The sack she had buried beneath the floorboards, covered with wood and dirt as if she could smother its secrets forever. He dropped it at his feet. Dust spiraled up between them. Maria's heart slammed against her ribs, the beat deafening in her ears. She tried to find words, but they tangled in her throat like dry weeds. Finally, they tore free in a broken whisper. "Please, don't take them off." Her voice cracked with desperation, a plea that seemed to hang in the night air. Heavier than the desert heat. The warrior tilted his head, his expression unreadable. His people knew how to mask emotion, but his eyes flickered an almost imperceptible crack in his steel composure. Slowly, as if he were handling something venomous, he crouched and loosened the rough knot at the mouth of the sack. The firelight flickered across his strong hands. He pulled it open. The burlap sagged. Something metallic glimmered faintly inside. Then, with one swift motion, he reached in and pulled the contents free. And the man who had faced cavalry rifles without flinching, who had bled and clawed his way through war, staggered back as if struck by an unseen blow. His knees buckled. The sack slipped from his grip and crumpled in the dirt. His broad shoulders trembled. His breathing turned harsh, uneven, as if the very sight of what lay before him had stolen the marrow from his bones. Maria pressed her back against the log wall of the cabin, her nails digging into the rough wood. She had seen him fight off 3 men with a knife. She had seen him stare death down with nothing but a glare. Yet now he was folding in on himself like a child confronted with a nightmare too great to endure. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the black sky. The desert coyotes howled somewhere far off, their cries laced with hunger. But here, between the woman and the warrior, there was only silence, thick, suffocating silence broken only by the sound of his ragged breath. His hand shook as he let the object drop onto the dirt. It landed with a dull metallic clink. Maria closed her eyes. She knew he had seen enough. Why? His voice, low and cracked, scraped against her like gravel. "Why would you keep these?" She couldn't answer. Not yet. The flames danced across his face, and for the first time since she had met him, his strength seemed to falter. His fear was not the fear of a warrior confronted with death. It was something older, deeper fear rooted in memory, in ghosts that clawed their way out of the grave to stand before him now. Maria wanted to run. She wanted to grab the sack, bury it again, and pretend it had never existed. But she couldn't. He had seen. And there was no turning back from what had been pulled into the light. Her lips trembled as she whispered again, softer this time, as if speaking to both him and the shadows that gathered around them. "Please, don't take them off." But it was too late. The Apache warrior had seen what the sack contained, and though neither of them spoke the words aloud, both knew the truth. Whatever was hidden in that burlap had the power to change everything. The object lay in the dirt between them, gleaming faintly in the firelight. The Apache warrior's chest rose and fell as though the air had turned to stone in his lungs. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of gripping spear shafts and rifles, trembled as if he were holding a newborn rattlesnake. Maria stared at him, frozen, her body pressed against the log wall of her cabin as though she could merge into it and disappear. Her lips had gone dry, her voice locked tight in her throat. The object was simple, yet nothing about it was ordinary. 5 silver medallions, strung together on a strip of rawhide leather, each stamped with a symbol: the jagged sun, the wolf, the serpent, the burning cross, and the lightning bolt. To anyone else, they would appear as tokens, trinkets taken from soldiers, perhaps spoils of war. But to him, they were not trophies. They were marks of death. He fell to his knees in the dirt, his long hair spilling forward like a curtain, his hands pressing into the earth as though he were trying to steady the world itself. No. His voice cracked. It was not the voice of the warrior Maria knew, the man who had carried himself with unbending pride. It was the voice of a child broken raw, pleading, "Not again." The firelight cast his shadow long across the sand, making him look like a man haunted by something larger than himself. He reached forward with trembling fingers and touched the medallions, flinching as though they burned. Maria's heart twisted. She wanted to go to him, to lay her hand on his shoulder, but her body would not move. The sight of him collapsing shook her as much as the medallions themselves. "You shouldn't have seen them," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "I told you, please, don't take them off." His head snapped up, eyes blazing. They were not angry, no, anger would have been easier to face. They were terrified. "Where did you get these?" His words were sharp, jagged, cutting the air between them like a blade. Maria closed her eyes. Images clawed their way back to her mind. The night she had found the sack, the blood that had seeped through the burlap, the whispers of men dying in the canyon. She hadn't wanted to believe it was real. She had buried it, told herself it would stay hidden. But secrets had a way of clawing to the surface. "I didn't steal them," she said, her voice thin. "I didn't," she swallowed hard. "They were left here, on my land, with blood all over them. I buried them because I was afraid of what they meant." The warrior rose slowly, his towering figure casting a shadow that swallowed her in the fire's glow. His breath was ragged, his fists clenched at his sides. "These are not just tokens," he said, his voice low, trembling. "They are curses. Each one belongs to a warrior, a brother who was taken." His jaw tightened. Taken by men who did not kill for survival, but for sport. To wear these is to mock the dead. Maria felt tears sting her eyes. She had not known. She had only feared the darkness tied to them. But now hearing it from his mouth, the weight crushed her chest. "I didn't wear them," she whispered. "I couldn't. I hid them because I was afraid someone might." The warriors. Gaze locked on her, piercing through the smoke and silence. For a moment, she saw something fragile in him, something rawer than rage or fear. A wound deeper than flesh. "My people believe," he said slowly, his voice shaking like dry leaves in the wind, "that to keep these is to keep the spirits bound. Their souls wander, crying for release. Do you know what happens when the spirits cannot rest?" Maria shook her head, her breath shallow. "They come for the living," he whispered. The fire crackled louder, spitting sparks into the desert night. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries echoing like voices from another world. Maria's knees weakened. She pressed her palm against the wall to steady herself. "Then tell me," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "what must I do?" The warrior bent down, scooped the medallions back into the sack with trembling hands and tied it shut. His jaw was clenched, his eyes glistening with something that looked like grief. "You cannot undo what is already done," he said, "but you can choose what happens next. And if you choose wrong," his voice broke, They will come for both of us." The night thickened, the canyon pressing in as though the walls themselves listened. Mariah's breath caught in her throat, for she knew now that her secret was not just hers to bear. The sack held more than silver medallions. It held a curse. The desert had never felt so alive. Mariah sat rigid against the cabin wall, every muscle straining as though the earth itself pressed down on her. The Apache warrior paced the fire's edge, the burlap sack clutched tight in his hand. His eyes flicked to the shadows as if he expected something to crawl from them at any moment. The night was unnaturally still. No wind rustled the juniper trees. No owl hooted. Even the coyotes that had howled moments ago had gone silent, as though silenced by a greater predator. Then it came a whisper, soft, faint, like dry leaves rubbing together. It slithered through the air and seemed to circle the fire. Mariah jerked upright, her heart hammering. "Did you hear that?" She breathed. The warrior froze. His head tilted, his long black hair falling across his sharp jawline. His muscles tightened, every scar along his body seeming to tense with him. Slowly, he nodded. "They are near." The words sent a chill through Mariah's bones. She gripped her skirt, her knuckles white. "What do they want?" He turned to her, his eyes dark, haunted. "Rest, but the medallions keep them bound." "Until?" "They are freed. They will circle us. Watch us." His voice dropped lower, almost a growl. "Test us." The fire crackled, sending a plume of sparks into the star-streaked sky. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, curling across the sand like reaching hands. Mariah's throat tightened. "I never meant for this," she whispered. "I only wanted to bury it, to forget." "There is no forgetting," he said, stepping closer to her. His bare chest gleamed with sweat, the tribal jewelry on his neck rattling faintly as he moved. "The spirits do not forgive. They wait." As if to punctuate his words, the whisper grew louder, distinct now. A voice. "No, not." One voice. Many. Murmuring in a language Mariah could not understand, layered over each other like overlapping waves. The hair on her arms rose. She pressed her palms over her ears, but the voices seeped through. The warrior strode to her side and crouched low, his hand gripping her wrist. His strength was steady, grounding. "Do not show fear," he warned. "Fear feeds them." But how could she not fear? The air itself seemed heavy, thick, charged with something unearthly. She could taste the copper of blood on her tongue, though she had bitten nothing. She could smell smoke that was not from the fire, and then she saw them, shapes thin, translucent flickering. At the edge of the firelight, shadows shaped like men, their faces blurred, their eyes empty hollows glowing faintly with pale fire. They circled, their bodies half smoke, half flesh, tethered by chains that rattled against nothing. Mariah gasped, clutching the warrior's arm. "Dear God?" He did not look at her. His jaw was set, his gaze locked on the circling forms. "They are my brothers," he said, his voice heavy with grief. "Warriors who fell, their medallions were taken as trophies. To wear them is to bind the soul. To keep them hidden is to bind it longer still." The figures drew closer. The fire, bent inward, its flame swaying unnaturally, pulled toward the medallion still hidden in the sack. The whispers grew into wails, cries that pierced the night, cries of anguish and rage. Mariah's chest constricted. Her tears blurred her vision. "Tell me what to do," she begged, her voice breaking. The warrior stood, towering over her, his muscles taut, his breath sharp. "To free them, you must face them. But once you call them, they will come to you. They will test if your spirit is strong enough to let them go." Mariah shook her head. "I can't. I don't know how." "You must," he said firmly, his hand gripping hers with unyielding strength. "Because if you do not, they will take you instead." A sudden gust of wind tore through the canyon, fierce and cold, though the sky remained clear and still. The fire roared higher, sparks whipping into the air. The spirits shrieked, their hollow mouths stretching wide. The warrior ripped open the sack and spilled the medallions onto the ground. The silver gleamed like lightning, and the spirits surged. Toward them, their voices a thunderous chorus. Maria covered her face, but the warrior held her firm. His deep voice rose above the wails, chanting in his native tongue, his words powerful, commanding. The medallions rattled, the ground trembled, and the fire flared so high it lit the canyon walls in crimson. Maria could feel them, the dead pressing close, their cold breath against her skin, their whispers clawing into her mind. And in that moment she understood. The sack had not cursed her. She had cursed herself the moment she chose to keep it hidden, and now the spirits demanded a price. The fire snapped violently, leaping higher than any natural flame. Shadows of the dead swirled around the camp like a storm of smoke and sorrow. Their voices, low, wailing, fractured, rose until the sound shook Mariah's bones. She pressed her hands to her ears, but the cries clawed straight into her soul. The Apache warrior stood firm in the firelight, shirtless and unyielding, his long black hair whipping in the unnatural wind. Tribal beads clattered softly against his chest as he chanted words older than the canyon walls themselves. His deep voice rolled like thunder, each syllable heavy with command. Mariah's heart pounded in terror. The translucent figures closed in, their chains rattling with every step, their hollow eyes locked on her. She could see their faces, now shattered fragments of men, scars across cheekbones, gaping wounds where bullets or blades had ended them, and all of them turned toward her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Not me, I didn't, but—" Her words dissolved into the roar of the spirits. One surged forward, its smoky hand lashing out. Mariah cried out as the cold swept across her skin, burning like ice. She stumbled back, her spine hitting the cabin wall. The warrior's voice cut through the chaos. "They do not strike at random. They strike at your guilt." Mariah's breath hitched. Her guilt. Her mind reeled back to that night, the gunshots echoing through the canyon, the smell of blood, the sack lying abandoned at her doorstep like a cursed offering. She hadn't fired the shots, but she had chosen silence. She hadn't buried the dead, only their medallions. She hadn't prayed for them, only prayed for her secret to stay hidden. Another spirit lunged. This one's hollow mouth opened, spilling a sound so sharp it sliced into her skull. Mariah screamed, dropping to her knees. "Stand!" the warrior bellowed, his voice as fierce as the fire. "Stand, or they will take you." Mariah forced herself upright, though her legs trembled beneath her. Tears blurred her vision, streaking down her dust-streaked face. The spirits encircled her fully now, smoke and fire weaving around their broken forms. The warrior moved closer, his presence grounding her, his hand briefly brushing her shoulder before he raised his arms to the sky. His chant shifted, rising in urgency, his voice calling not only to the dead but to the Great Spirit who ruled above them all. "Face them." "Mariah," he said, his eyes burning into hers, "tell them what they need to hear." Her throat was raw, her breath shuddering. "I can't. You must." The spirits surged again, their chains striking the dirt, their hollow wails shaking the air. Maria clutched her chest, gasping. Then, through the storm, she remembered their eyes, not empty, not fully. Beneath the ghost fire glow, there was sorrow. Sorrow that demanded acknowledgment. Her trembling lips parted. "I'm sorry," she choked out. Her voice was weak at first, nearly swallowed by the cries. She pressed her hands together, falling to her knees in the dust. "I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to give you peace. I buried them because I was afraid." But you deserve more than my fear. You deserve remembrance. You deserve freedom. The spirits still dot there. Forms wavered in the firelight, their chains flickering like smoke about to vanish. The whispering softened, no longer a storm but a mournful hum. The warrior's chant thundered louder, his voice powerful, commanding the veil between life and death to break. He scooped the medallions from the dirt, held them high, and shouted. Words that vibrated in Mariah's bones. The medallions glowed faintly red, then white, then a piercing blue. One by one they cracked, splintering into shards of silver that scattered like stardust into the wind. Mariah shielded her eyes as the spirits cried out one final time, not in rage, but in release. Their forms rose upward, dissolving into the night sky, their chains breaking with echoes that rolled across the canyon like thunder. And then, silence. The fire shrank back to its natural glow, crackling softly. The canyon breathed again. The coyotes' distant calls returned, the night alive with familiar sounds. Mariah collapsed to her knees, tears streaking her cheeks. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but her chest felt strangely lighter, as if the weight of years had been lifted. The warrior stood over her, his chest heaving, sweat glistening on his skin. His long hair clung to his shoulders, his tribal jewelry rattling faintly as he knelt beside her. For a moment, his fierce exterior cracked, and she saw the grief and relief mingled in his dark eyes. "They are free," he said softly. "At last." Mariah looked up at him, her vision still blurred by tears. "And me?" she whispered. "Am I free too?" The warrior's gaze lingered on her, unreadable but heavy with meaning. "That depends," he said slowly. "Some curses break with fire, others." He touched her hand gently, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Others stay with us forever." Mariah shivered, though the night was warm, because deep in the canyon silence, beneath the echoes of release, she thought she still heard it, one faint whisper, one spirit not yet gone. The canyon lay hushed, the fire burning low, its flames whispering instead of roaring. Mariah pressed her palms into the dirt, trembling, her breath ragged in her throat. The air no longer howled with spirits, no longer pressed down on her chest. Like a stone, yet something still lingered. The Apache warrior stood tall beside her, the sweat on his skin cooling in the night breeze, his long black hair clinging damp against his face and chest. His dark eyes scanned the canyon, restless, as though he too felt the silence wasn't complete. "They are gone," he said softly. His words held conviction, but not certainty. Mariah shook her head, her heart pounding with a fear she could not name. "Not all of them." He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" Her voice trembled. "I heard it. When the others rose, a whisper fainter, but there, it didn't leave with them." The warrior's jaw tightened. He moved closer, kneeling in front of her, his hands resting on his thighs, muscles taut beneath the firelight. His tribal beads clicked softly as he lowered his voice. "Tell me exactly what you heard." Mariah swallowed hard. Her lips felt dry, her throat raw. "It said my name." The warrior's expression darkened. For the first time, she saw not only fear in his eyes, but something else: recognition. "That is not possible," he said, though his voice carried no weight of denial. "They had no reason to call you." Her fingers dug into the dirt. "Then why me?" The wind stirred, faint but deliberate, curling around them like a snake. The fire bent inward again, though not as violently as before. Mariah's hair brushed across her face, and in the whisper of the breeze she swore she heard it again. "Mariah." Her chest tightened. She gripped the warrior's wrist, desperate, nails pressing into his skin. "You hear it too, don't you?" His silence was her answer, slowly. He turned his face toward the canyon shadows, his features rigid, carved with grief. "There was one warrior," he said at last. His voice was low, burdened with memory. "You freed many, but one. One was bound differently." Mariah's voice was barely a whisper. "Who?" He drew in a long breath, then met her eyes. "My brother." Her heart lurched. "Your—" He nodded once, sharply, as if saying the word aloud would wound him. His medallion was among them, the serpent. His hand flexed unconsciously, as if gripping something long lost. But his soul does not wander like the others. His rage was greater, his bond stronger. Mariah's throat tightened. Stronger. To what? His gaze shifted to her, piercing, unblinking. "To you." Her stomach dropped. She shook her head violently. "No, I didn't know him." "I couldn't. You touched what bound him," the warrior interrupted, his voice firm, though grief crackled beneath the surface. "When you buried the sack, when you kept it hidden, you tied yourself to him, and now he clings to you." Mariah's tears blurred the firelight. "What does he want from me?" The warrior's jaw clenched. His eyes glistened faintly, though his face remained hard. "He wants what all the restless want, to live again. And if he cannot, he will take you instead." The fire sputtered suddenly, dropping low, the flames gasping as if suffocated. A shadow stretched across the dirt, though no body cast it. The warrior sprang to his feet, placing himself between Maria and the darkness, his powerful frame tense. Muscles coiled like a bowstring. The shadow rippled, shifting, twisting into a faint form. For an instant, Mariah saw it clearly, eyes burning pale, a face half familiar in its brokenness, staring straight at her, her breath hitched. Her heart stilled. The whisper slithered again through the night. "Mariah." She clutched the warrior's arm, pressing herself against the warmth of his skin, desperate for an anchor. "What do we do?" she pleaded. His face was grim, his voice steady despite the storm building around them. "We fight, but not with steel, with truth." Mariah's tears streaked down her cheeks. "What truth?" "The one you fear most," he said, his voice deep, resonant, carrying the weight of a man who had faced death 1,000 times. "The spirit will not rest until you speak it." The canyon grew colder. The fire shrank to embers. The whisper swelled, curling through her very bones. And Mariah realized with a shudder that whatever truth the spirit sought from her, it was a truth she had buried as deeply as that sack, and now it demanded to be unearthed. The night felt endless. Each crackle of the fire, each whisper of the wind in the canyon walls seemed to carry voices neither Mariah nor the Apache warrior could ignore. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching and curling like claws toward. The pair huddled near the dying flames, the warrior his chest rising and falling in sharp, steady breaths kept his eyes fixed on the darkness. He had faced enemies before, men with rifles and soldiers with cannons, but nothing like this. Spirits did not bleed, did not fear, did not falter. They had been denied rest, and their torment wrapped around him as surely as the night air. Mariah shivered beneath her shawl, her hands trembling as she clutched the silver medallions. She had not dared to touch them again since he pulled them from the sack, but she could feel their cold weight like stones in her heart. She knew, deep down, that the story he told, the massacre, the betrayal, the curse, was not legend. It was memory. "You cannot keep them," the warrior finally sighed, his voice low, edged with both command and despair. His long black hair whipped across his scarred shoulders in the desert wind, feathers trembling in the strands. "These belong to the dead. Every night they rise to claim what was stolen." Mariah's throat tightened. "If I give them back, if I put them where they were taken from, will they stop?" The warrior did not answer. His silence was worse than any warning. The fire sputtered, throwing sparks into the sky, and Maria swore she saw faces in the embers. The spirits were near. Her chest ached with terror. She reached out, fingers brushing the warrior's arm, needing the anchor of flesh and warmth. He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned toward her, eyes burning not with anger, but with something heavier, something wounded. You must understand, these chains are not only theirs. They are mine too. Confusion flickered across her face. Yours? He lowered his head, bone necklaces clattering softly. I was there. I fought. I failed. My brother, my people. They fell, and I did not save them. Now their cries bind me to this earth. If you carry these medallions, you carry me as well. You will never be free of the dead. Mariah's breath caught. She had feared the spirits, yes, but not this his own confession, his own torment bleeding into hers. She saw in his eyes not the face of an enemy, not the savage men the townsfolk whispered about, but a man crushed beneath memory, chained by guilt sharper than steel dot. Another gust of wind swept through the canyon, and with it came the unmistakable sound of rattling chains. From the darkness, a figure began to form. At first, it was smoke. Then it took shape, the broad shoulders of a warrior, the long braid of black hair down his back, the gleam of silver against his chest. His face was indistinct, a blur of shadow and firelight, but the eyes burned bright and accusing. Mariah's scream lodged in her throat. The Apache warrior's breath hitched. He took one step forward, hand trembling as though reaching for something he both longed for and feared. Brother, he whispered. The spirit stopped just beyond the firelight, the chains coiling around its form like serpents. Its voice, if it could be called, that rolled through the canyon like thunder. Why do you stand with her? The words struck Mariah like a blow, though she knew they weren't meant for her. She pressed closer to the warrior, clutching his arm, desperate. Not to faint. The warrior clenched his jaw. Because she does not know. She is not the thief. The spirit's glowing eyes flicked toward Mariah, and the chains rattled. All who hold the silver are bound. Mariah sobbed, shaking her head violently. I didn't mean to. I didn't know. Please. The fire hissed, dropping embers onto the dirt. The spirit stepped forward, closer, chains dragging, the sound echoing like nails across stone. The Apache warrior moved suddenly, placing himself between Mariah and the apparition. His body glistened in the fire's last light, his muscles taut as he spread his arms. If you want her, he said, voice low and unyielding, you must come through me. The canyon fell silent, save for the hiss of the dying fire, the spirit's form rippled, chains tightening. Its glowing eyes narrowed, and for the first time its voice carried something like sorrow. Then you have chosen your death. And with that, the shadow surged forward. The world seemed to pause on the edge of the fire's fading glow. The spirit's chains rattled like iron dragged across stone, each clang echoing through the canyon as though the earth itself mourned. The frontier woman pressed against the warrior's back, trembling, her breath sharp and uneven. The Apache warrior stood firm, muscles rigid, bone necklaces swing against his scarred chest as he spread his arms wide. His long black hair lashed about in the ghostly wind, beads and feathers catching faint glimmers of light. He faced the figure that had haunted his nights, the brother whose death had never been avenged. The spirit's eyes, two orbs of white fire, seared into him. You failed us, the voice thundered, thick with grief, with rage, with endless nights of unrest. You let our blood stain this soil while you drew breath. The warrior's lips tightened. For years he had carried this guilt in silence, believing it his burden alone. Now the canyon itself bore witness to his confession. I did fail you, he said, his voice steady though his throat burned with shame. I fought, but not enough. I bled, but not enough. I lived, and that has been my punishment. The spirit advanced, chains coiling around its arms and legs, hissing like serpents. The fire shuddered as though the air itself recoiled. But this woman, the warrior continued, his voice growing louder, stronger. She does not carry your chains. She is no thief, no murderer. She has suffered enough from curses not her own. Maria clutched at his arm, whispering hoarsely, Don't do this for me." He turned his head just slightly, enough that she could see the faintest flicker of a smile. Not of joy, but of resolve. There is no other way. Then, before the spirit could strike, he dropped to one knee and slammed his fist against the dirt. Dust burst upward. He tore the silver medallions from Mariah's trembling hands, clutching them tightly as he lifted his face toward the burning eyes of his brother's ghost. "Take them," he roared. "Take me." The canyon howled with sudden wind. The medallions burned in his palm, searing his flesh, filling the air with the acrid scent of scorched skin. He did not let go. The spirit's form rippled, wavering between smoke and flesh, sorrow and fury. The chains tightened, rattling violently. "You would give yourself in her place?" The warrior's dark eyes glowed with defiance. "It should have been me that night. Let it be me now." Mariah's cry tore through the canyon. "No, you don't have to, please, don't." She tried to wrench the medallions from his hand, but his grip was iron, his muscles strained, veins standing out against his skin, every breath a battle. Against the fire consuming his flesh, the spirit moved closer, towering above him, chains lashing like whips in the air. For a moment, the frontier woman thought it would devour him, drag him screaming into whatever shadowed world it came from, but then the spirit paused. Its burning eyes softened, sorrow flickering like a dying ember. The chains slackened. "You were my brother," the spirit whispered, its voice breaking through the thunder, revealing pain as human as any man's. "We wanted only your courage, not your guilt." The chains fell away, shattering into sparks that drifted upward like fireflies. The medallions crumbled in the warrior's hand, turning to dust that blew away on the desert wind. The spirit's form shimmered, its edges fading, its voice growing fainter. "Be free, my brother. Protect the living and remember us without shame." The warrior bowed his head, tears cutting paths down his scarred cheeks. "I will," he whispered. Then the spirit was gone. The canyon fell silent, the night returning to its natural rhythm, the wind, the insects, the faint crackle of the dying fire. The warrior slumped forward, his body trembling. The weight of centuries of grief suddenly lifted. Mariah caught him. Before he hit the dirt, wrapping her arms around his broad shoulders. His chest rose and fell raggedly against her, but he was alive. "You saved me," she whispered through tears. His head tilted, his hair brushing against her face, and his voice was weary but resolute. "No, I saved us both." The stars shone. Brighter above them, unclouded now, the oppressive shadow lifted from the canyon. For the first time in years, the warrior felt the night air fill his lungs without the choke of guilt. He was still scarred, still burdened, but no longer bound. Mariah leaned into him, and together they sat before the smoldering fire, two souls who had survived the weight of the dead. And when the dawn finally broke across the desert, it did not bring chains or shadows, only light.